he's just starting to think about it. But he thinks he wants to do engineering. Right. Is it from you or? I would be surprised. Exactly. I did. Oh, maybe remember. Oh, he was on. No. I would you remember. No. More than I do.
Everybody can play a role in responding to the critical issue of climate change.
What you guys are doing is way out in front of a lot of people.
We need something to bring the attention of the world to climate change. That's the purpose of our prize.
The Rose Walters Prize is given each year at Dickinson College to recognize an individual or an organization for the environmental activism work that they've done.
We've selected individuals who have dedicated their lives to address these issues.
The climate crisis is existential. We are in an emergency for our planet and its people.
Dickinson is producing a thinking society, incredibly energetic, incredibly inquiring, and very critical.
My impressions of Dickinson's sustainability is so impressive, so heartfelt, so encouraging. I'm absolutely blown away by the commitment of the students, the faculty to enlighten, to enhance a better world for us all.
If we don't address it in a major way soon, it may be too late.
Good evening to all. Great to see such a crowd. It's my great pleasure and privilege to welcome you to our 14th annual lecture honoring the recipient of the Sam Rose Class of '58 and Julie Walters Prize for Global Environmental Activism here at Dickinson College. I'd also like to welcome the many alumni, parents, and friends, and other colleges and universities joining us both in person, of course, or via our live stream that we're providing tonight as well. Welcome all of you to Dickinson College. A recording will be available online to share with others at the conclusion of this session so that we can continue to share tonight's important message. This year, the Rose Walters Prize honors the Environmental Defense Fund. Having spent time with the EDF's Executive Director, Amanda Leyland, during her visit, on commencement weekend this past May, and today spending time with our terrific 3 EDF panelists. I know how important this organization is to moving the world towards clean energy. And I'm sure we will all benefit from tonight's discussion. These are 3 extremely accomplished individuals, and I love the format tonight. I think it's going to be really special. As highlighted in the video that we just watched, this prize was established by Sam Rose, by our great friend Sam Rose, class of 1958, and Julie Walters, 2 remarkably devoted Dickinsonians whose passion and commitment to protecting our environment and to raising awareness of the dangers of climate change are truly inspiring. This is a big week for Sam, as you know, as we announced this morning that Sam has, in addition to all the other things that he does, and certainly taking part in this prize for so many years, he's underwriting the construction of the great new gallery that will house also our Center for the Future of Native Peoples, named after Jim Thorpe. Sam is a passionate person in every facet of his life, and he proves that every day with his commitment to Dickinson College, as Julie Walters does, of course, as well. And Sam and Julie are not able to be with us tonight. They may be joining us via the live stream, and if they are, I think it is right and it is proper for us to thank them for their incredible generosity and their dedication to our college. So if you're watching, thank you. If Sam were here, he'd have something really interesting to say about this evening's proceeding, something that would also be entertaining, I suspect, as well. So wherever you are, Sam, I hope you're thinking about that. Over the course of this residency, many of you have had the opportunity to interact with members of the Environmental Defense Fund team. They have met and shared meals with groups of students and faculty, visited many classes on topics across the curriculum, and led a hands-on climate leadership workshop. I'm certain that you'll enjoy and benefit from tonight's talk, which is the capstone of the residency, and I've heard already from some faculty members and students just how rewarding their participation has been and how enlightening it's been and truly inspiring as well. It's now my pleasure to introduce Maggie Conklin, who will introduce our speakers. Maggie is a member of the class of 2027 and an environmental science and Spanish double major. After her family moved across the country twice before her 15th birthday, she now calls Middlebury, Vermont, her home. Outside her classroom work, Maggie works at the Center for Sustainability Education as the EcoReps coordinator, working with 30 members of the Dickinson community to show that sustainability isn't just a buzzword, but a collection of everyday actions that contribute to a brighter future. Additionally, she's a new student guide working to welcome new students to our campus and one of the 4 captains of the Dickinson College Club Ultimate Frisbee team. And she enjoys hobbies such as climbing and cooking during her free time. Anybody here from the Frisbee team? All right, come on. You come out to see Maggie tonight, that's great. And we heard all about the Frisbee team tonight at dinner, which was quite entertaining. Maggie, would you please come forward and introduce our guests?
Thank you, President Jones. I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. Dickinson College is on the unceded lands of the Susquehannock Nation. We acknowledge the many indigenous peoples that lived with these lands, as well as the thousands of indigenous children forced into the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in 1879 as part of a federal cultural eradication effort. Tonight, I have the honor of introducing this year's recipient of the Sam Rose and Julie Walters Prize for Global Environmental Activism at Dickinson College, the Environmental Defense Fund. The EDF is an organization started in 1967 with the initial mission of getting DDT, a previously very common and toxic pesticide, banned in the United States. After the campaign's success, the organization continued to grow with the goal of tackling the increasingly large challenges that face our environment. Headquartered in New York City, but with offices across the US and world, over 1,000 employees of the EDF work to create change driven by science and economics. This work includes pushing major corporations to reconsider damaging industrial practices and aiding in the development of policies that protect our most vulnerable communities from the harmful effects of climate change. The EDF's work is grounded in creating a cleaner and more equitable world for every living being, and the organization and its members demonstrate that we are not required to maintain the status quo. With creative solutions, we can create positive change. This evening, we welcome 3 representatives, John Goldstein, Dr. Natasha Vidangos, and Morgan Rote from the Environmental Defense Fund. Each an example of a leader in research and action in the global transition to clean energy to sit on this panel, accelerating the clean energy transition to low-carbon alternatives. John Goldstein, Associate Vice President of Energy Transition, specializes in environmental policy regarding the state and federal land and resources. John works with partners in government, industry, and civil society to reduce methane emissions from the oil and gas industry. Dr. Natasha Vidangos, Associate Vice President of Innovation and Technology Policy, oversees work to advance an efficient and equitable clean energy transition, including efforts to enhance the impact of climate innovation. Morgan Rote, Senior Policy Director of Fuels and Feedstocks, leads the EDF's global policy work to promote clean fuels as an alternative to oil and gas in hard-to-decarbonize sectors of the economy. With us to moderate tonight's panel, the Director of the Center for Sustainability Education here at Dickinson College, Dr. Neil Leary. As an environmental science student at Dickinson, I am looking for ways to make tangible change in our dynamic world. I am incredibly excited to hear from these experts about how the EDF is creating positive impact globally. More specifically, I am eager to learn about what low-carbon solutions are on the horizon. Please join me in welcoming representatives from the Environmental Defense Fund.
All right. We've been planning this for quite a while. I'm really excited to have such a very accomplished, knowledgeable team from the Environmental Defense Fund with us this evening. We're going to start off with Natasha is going to kind of lay the groundwork for us of kind of what is the energy transition? Is it needed? If so, why? A little bit about what is the sources of energy we're currently using? What are the sources that we should be thinking about transitioning to in the near term and long-term future? So I'll hand it over to you, Natasha, to kick us off.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. We've had a really, really lovely time here, and we are so impressed by this community. To start us off, I wanted to start with just a couple slides. We can't help it. It's just slides. We need slides. We always need slides. And I'd like to start with this one right here. What you see behind me is the mapping of the average mean temperatures on the planet over the years. And you'll notice that average mean temperatures do vary a bit. They get hotter in some years, colder in some years, but overall there is definitely a trend. Our planet is warming, and so I'm going to take as given for this conversation today that climate change is real, climate change is proceeding, climate change will have effects that are primarily deeply, deeply harmful across societies, and if we don't slow it down and stop putting so many greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, it will get worse. So the question is, what do we do about it? How do we address it? And this particular conversation is focused on the energy transition. I'll get to the energy pieces in a second, but I do want to just put a little bit of terminology out there. The sort of deeper red that you're seeing in this chart is showing you places where we're hitting about 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. It's incredible that so few degrees can mean so much across the planet. And in 2015, there was the passage of the Paris Climate Accord, an international treaty that agreed to try to limit warming below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and even better if we could limit it below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And it is beginning to appear that we are quite near or potentially at that 1.5 degree point. We are potentially already there. So, what comes next? This is a chart that shows emissions over time. You can see the black line up here is the actual historical emissions, out to sort of recent dates. And then after this point, we don't know what happens next, but with a number of different forms of modeling, we can try to guess. And if you do modeling that tries to bring us down all the way to that 1.5 degree scenario, it requires an incredible, unprecedented change in the status quo to basically stop emitting precipitously. This is getting harder and harder to contemplate. Going up a line, if you imagine everything goes really, really well, maybe we can get to sort of the optimistic 1.9 degrees Celsius. If you take only those pledges and targets that have already been made and assume that all of them are going to move forward, you can get to about 2.1 degrees Celsius. If you think about only the targets that were made out to 2030, between the lines here, it's because sometimes targets out to 2050 are more aspirational. They're harder to achieve. So take the closer ones that are likely have more grit behind them. If you only take them, we're talking about a 2.6 degree world. And overall, if you assume not a whole lot of major change happens, we're living in that blue bar. We may be facing a world that's going pretty much up to 3 degrees Celsius of climate change. That's double the degrees of that 1.5 we're reaching today. The impacts of that are very likely to be catastrophic. So how do we get back down onto those lower lines? And what does this have to do with energy? Turns out a lot. About 3/4 of emissions are from the energy sector. There are, of course, other emissions that come from agriculture, industrial processes like cement production, waste, land use changes, but the lion's share of it really is an energy story, which is why we're here talking about the energy transition. You can break down into many different kinds of categories what types of energy are responsible for what parts of it. This particular chart is from our friends at WRI, and they have a data visualization where you can dig into it in greater detail. But a sort of good rule of thumb is about 1/3 of it is coming from buildings, 1/3 from transportation, and 1/3 from industry. So we would need to see progress in all of those areas. What do I mean by progress? This is my favorite type of data visualization. It's called a Sankey diagram. If you've never looked at one of these before, I'll sort of walk you through how you read it. And basically on the left, you see the primary supply of energy, in this case, oil, coal, natural gas, hydropower, nuclear, wind, solar, geothermal, biomass. And then if you follow the pathway, the thickness of the bar tells you how much energy is coming from that source and where it goes in terms of end use. So you can see that oil very often goes through refineries, and then a pretty significant proportion of it goes to transportation. A little bit of it goes to non-energy uses. A lot of that is for things like plastic production, petrochemicals. A tiny amount of it's going for residential and commercial purposes. Some of it is going to industry. In the case of coal, you can see that it's passing through the conversion into electricity. So for both coal and natural gas, we use a lot of those resources to create electricity, and then the electricity is what gets used in other places. So this is a chart from the IPCC estimating how the world used energy in 2019. That's already a couple years ago, and already a lot has changed. But in the same report, they also present this chart, which is where global energy use would need to be in 2060 to stick within that 2 degree scenario. Now, this is based on modeling. One can always argue with the details of how these things are modeled, and different people will come up with different numbers for it. But the scale of the transformation is clear. Whereas before, we saw ourselves, going back again, this is really, the 2019 picture is really showing you a fossil fuel economy globally. We're primarily focused on oil, coal, and natural gas. The renewables and the zero carbon resources are a very small part of the picture. But in the transformed version, It's coal, oil, and natural gas now are a very small part of the picture. Geothermal is sort of picked up as a new option, but still somewhat small here. And the real grist of it is being carried by solar, biomass, wind, and some of these other spaces. So another point I'll point out here is that we've also got a lot more electricity. This is an electrified world where we've moved as many functions as possible onto electricity, and we've made the electricity cleaner. So some of the primary keywords for how you make the energy transition happen are build as many renewables as you can for power, use as much renewable fuel as you can where it's not for power, and everything that you can electrify with that clean power, electrify it. I'd also add on top of that, energy efficiency is often overlooked as one of the opportunities. This gets a whole lot harder if we're using energy wastefully across the system, so we need to really contain the challenge in order to enable the transition to happen. So this is all well and good, but I just want to take a moment to close here on the slides to say we do live on this beautiful planet in a world that is interconnected and reliant on an economy, on jobs, on livelihoods that are based on the industries that currently exist, the governance structures that currently exist, the supply chains that currently exist, not only in our country, but internationally. Change can be hard, and you can't just snap your fingers and get from A to B. It is an incredibly complicated process to try to create the process that moves us toward that transition and brings everyone along with us and makes that transition not only beneficial, but lasting. So that is what lies ahead for us. Back to you, Neil.
All right, thank you. So, we can't just snap our fingers and get to that future that's being projected of moving away, if not entirely, largely away from fossil energy. There's going to be a time where we're going to continue to be using fossil-based energy. So maybe, John, tell us a little bit about how should we be thinking about fossil energy in this transition? How do we approach that? What should we be doing? How should we be framing those issues?
Yeah, so in addition to what Natasha said, we need to be driving down emissions from fossil energy as quickly as possible. We need to electrify what we can, so EVs and whatnot, to replace the transportation fuels. And we need to try and limit emissions from those hard to decarbonize parts of the fossil fuel supply chain, things like plastics, steel production, things like that. And, one of the reasons why is you can see here in this image, I think it's from the Veer satellite probably, and it's a nighttime image of the United States. You could probably pick out the East Coast there. In the upper left, you will see somewhere west of Minneapolis, there is what appears to be a huge city. If folks know geography, you'll know that there's not really a big city between Minneapolis and Seattle. What there is a huge oil and gas field called the Bakken in western North Dakota that has just exploded in development in the past decade and a half. What you're seeing here in this image from the nighttime are the light from the flares that are burning in the Bakken. So the oil and gas industry is drilling for oil. That's what they want. That's the more lucrative commodity. They get natural gas that comes up out of the ground with the oil. And rather than invest in infrastructure to get that natural gas to market, they simply burn it off. They treat it like a nuisance. Now, burning it is a little bit better than allowing it to escape to the atmosphere without being combusted, but it still creates pollution. It's still incredibly wasteful and is a problem. Yeah, there you go. So I work on the methane issue at EDF. We've been doing this for a little over a decade. Methane is an incredibly powerful greenhouse gas. Pound for pound, it's more than 80 times more powerful than carbon dioxide at driving climate change in the short term. And so that's why Environmental Defense Fund has been working so hard on this issue. Decarbonizing, getting carbon dioxide levels down is important in the long term. Methane is incredibly powerful and important in the short term. So for those of us, probably all of us in this room, that want to address this issue in our lifetimes. This is a very important way to do it, to bend that curve. Oil and gas is the largest industrial source of methane emissions in the US, and it's also natural gas. So the gas that's probably being burned to light this room, to heat this room, is methane. And so efforts to limit flaring, to limit venting, to limit leaks of this methane from the oil and gas industry keeps that energy in the pipe, allows people to put it to productive use, and allows for more tax and royalty revenue to be collected for taxpayers. So it's kind of this like win-win-win. It also limits health-harming forms of pollution that also impact these areas, things like ozone or smog that have become increasing problems in the parts of the country where we develop a lot of oil and gas.
All right, thank you, John. So Morgan, we've heard from John about methane emissions as being an important part of this. There are many different components, pieces, moving pieces. It's very complex in thinking about how we move towards, a lower emission, lower carbon system. Maybe share with us a little bit about, what you see as some of the critical issues besides methane that we need to be paying attention to.
Well, Natasha did a really good job of explaining sort of the technologies that we need to lean into. I want to talk a little bit about the reasons why that isn't so easy, and sort of the challenges that we face for several different technologies. There's a challenge in terms of economics in some of these technologies. Some clean fuels, alternatives to oil and gas, are still much more expensive than natural gas. A colleague, an investor recently said to me that if natural gas is water, hydrogen is champagne, and no one can afford champagne right now. So that is a big challenge we're facing at the moment, especially. There's politics. So even for renewables, which are cheaper than coal in most geographies, there's been a big political backlash against them, and those tax credits have been dialed back under this administration. There's also infrastructure and permitting challenges and governance things at play where we're not able to build as many new renewables projects as we need to be building. There's also behavioral issues at play where electric vehicles, people are still nervous about, will I be able to find a charging station, and do I trust an electric vehicle? Do I like a paper straw instead of a plastic straw? Like, there are some like behavioral economics issues at play as well. And so the climate space has a lot of opportunity ahead, but there are a lot of challenges that we have to tackle.
Okay, so the good news is an energy transition is underway. We're seeing that happen, and maybe Natasha, could you describe for us a bit about what is it? What are the trends that we're seeing, maybe both in the United States and maybe looking abroad as well?
Yeah, I threw up this slide, which shows just a couple of the trends that we're seeing, and some of this is really good news. We've come a long way in the last 10 years in terms of renewable development. I remember when I was working in this field in about 2009, solar was considered kind of fringe, not really a thing. And we're in a very different space now. Over on the left here, you see a number of the mid-year 2025 insights that came out of Ember, analysis firm, and said in very, very condensed words, solar and wind globally have outpaced demand. We're building more of it than actually is being entirely demanded. That's exciting. Solar saw record growth across the world, and we're seeing growth in interesting places. It's growing tremendously in China, but also in places like Pakistan, where a rooftop solar program has really taken off at incredible speeds. We've also seen renewables overtake coal globally for the first time. So, where I was showing you the Sankey diagram earlier, and the fact that we had this fat bar of coal and this tiny bar of solar, already that is starting to move very seriously. We're seeing coal fall in both China and India, and power sector emissions across the globe have largely plateaued. The figure you see on the right here comes from the International Energy Agency, and I will flag it's from 2023. This is going to be relevant in a second. But what it's showing you is for different technology areas like solar PV, batteries, wind, heat pumps, and electrolyzers, the light blue refers to the existing manufacturing capacity from 2022 production. That's there. That's happening. We're making it. Blue is places where they can ramp up the existing capacity to make more of it. That means the infrastructure is already there. That's pretty given. Blue, lighter blue, is announced manufacturing projects that are committed. Something's, they've signed on the dotted line for that one. Green is much more aspirational. It's announced manufacturing projects that are preliminary. And then orange means that there is a gap between how much is there and what we think would be necessary to get to a 2050 net zero scenario where we're not producing more emissions on net. So you can see with solar, actually, we've done pretty amazingly well. We've produced more, or if you include the sort of announced preliminary data, we are producing more than is necessarily called for in these scenarios. Solar is doing very well. Batteries, we've got a lot of progress. Most of what's here, though, is still in that sort of preliminary state, and there is a little bit of a gap between where we are at and what we would need to get to net zero. Wind is a much more serious story. It's not as easy to ramp up capacity of wind based on existing infrastructure. We're usually using the infrastructure that we have, and a lot more of what's there is not even in the aspirational state. We just really have a gap. Heat pumps, similar story. Electrolyzers, I'll note there wasn't enormous amounts of it available, and in 23 there was an enormous energy around hydrogen and hydrogen production. I would say that a lot of this green bar of the aspirational plans to build out hydrogen capacity has now largely crumpled. So main takeaways from this is there are some areas where we are doing really well. There are still some very serious gaps. We need to fill those gaps. And a lot of this can still change depending on the kind of dynamics we're seeing. One more little slide here. This also varies very much geographically. There are some very good stories to tell, but there's not good stories to tell everywhere. So this chart is again from Ember. It's showing that fossil usage fell year on year in China and India, while the US and the EU's rose in this time period. So in China, you're actually seeing a major reduction in fossil fuel use. In India, also pretty impressive amount. In the United States, we're still increasing fossil fuel use year on year. And in the EU, in spite of having significant reductions last year, they've moved back into the growth period again. So more work lies ahead.
We saw from Natasha's slides that there are some significant differences in different parts of the world. There are different pathways by which we can transition to a clean energy, low carbon system. Maybe Morgan, tell us a little bit about how this looks different, that pathway, different pathways that might be followed in different parts of the world. Give us a sense of the variations that are going on and may come in coming years.
Yeah, I mean, this is a helpful overview of where we're seeing growth in different, technologies in different parts of the world. I would say as politics have changed in the U.S., we are seeing a full retreat on climate progress in the U.S. So that's no longer an option for sort of being a market leader. So we're looking to other geographies to provide that leadership. And there's some, more interesting and creative demand drivers. For example, the EU has an emissions trading system, like a cap and trade program, and they are putting in place a trade measure that would tax imports into that geography on the basis of carbon intensity. So that means that a producer of steel or a car in the US all of a sudden is going to have to pay extra if their product is dirty. So that's an interesting lever. The International Maritime Organization and the International Civil Aviation Organization are both the sort of leaders in setting ambition for the maritime and aviation sectors, and they both have very ambitious targets for clean fuels for ships and planes. So those are just a few examples of where we're seeing progress and And I'm hopeful that the U.S. jumps back into the game in a few years.
Right. So what do you see as the main drivers of a transition to clean energy? Is it the economics shifting? Is it technological innovation? Is it policies and regulation? Changes in public attitudes? Is it all the above? Is it other things? Maybe if you know, whoever wants to kind of jump in on this and share your sense of kind of what's moving us, we hope, towards a cleaner future.
I'll start, and then I think my colleagues will probably jump in. But I think the correct answer is probably all of the above. But one important piece, and maybe lesser understood piece, is economics. So starting here in Pennsylvania and then quickly spreading around the country, you guys are familiar with the hydraulic fracturing boom. All of this natural gas flooded the market, which made natural gas prices very low and affordable for people. That led to fuel switching at electric generating plants from coal to natural gas. And you know, that seems like a good deal for the climate. On a per BTU basis, natural gas has only half the climate impact of coal. However, that's only true if that natural gas isn't leaking out before it gets there. So that's why it's so important that we continue to drive down as low as possible the methane intensity of that natural gas. Yeah, maybe I'll turn it over to you guys.
Yeah, I would just add to the all of the above part of the story. There can be many different sets of drivers that move us forward, and we have to be ready to get creative about those combinations and build them wherever we can, for whatever reasons. I like to say it's a lot like sailing, where sometimes the wind is not blowing you where you want to go. And so you try to capture what you can in the wind. You do what's called tacking, where the wind takes you a little bit one direction, then maybe you have to adjust the sail, go a little bit another direction, until through sometimes more indirect action, you build yourself space where you really are going where you need to go. Some of these things are going to take more time. Some of these things are about building support and building awareness. Some of these things are about innovation. I would love to see some of these new strategies coming forward, like geothermal energy, like small modular nuclear reactors, like, you know, more efficient and more effective grid enhancing technologies that can make the grids work more effectively. I would love to see those all get more affordable, more effective, more commercialized. And a lot of things come from the old playbook too. We still need good policy on the ground, and there's still a lot of room to do great stuff at state levels, internationally, in partnerships with corporations, in partnerships with civil society organizations. At the end of the day, all of it requires the ability to sort of surgically design where we go next and how we maximize our impact going forward. And that's a lot of the work that we do.
Well, I'll just add that investors is a really interesting lever that I think sometimes we forget about, especially in the absence of policymakers being willing or able to make strong commitments. Investors often have a longer term time horizon, and they're internalizing the cost of climate change into their risk assessments. And so that's been a really good partnership for EDF. Is identifying investor groups who can put pressure on companies to be making the right investments into clean projects.
So some assert that a continued and accelerating transition to clean energy is inevitable. It's happening, it's going to continue. Others take the view that the transition is actually in crisis. It's in trouble. Are these views, are they in conflict, or is there some truth in both? Share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, sort of as we're seeing here, very often the answer is all of the above. If you have questions about this exam, the answer is often all of the above. So there are places where, you know, very important policies that we have relied on are under threat. You know, having, you know, the tariff policies changing and shifting as quickly as they are changing and shifting, having, you know, licenses for approved projects be revoked, having funding not be utilized the way it was intended by Congress when it was assigned. These are all very, very serious problems. At the same time, we're in a very different place than we were 10 years ago. The renewable energy industry has more momentum than it ever has. We're more innovative than we've ever been. And so a lot of that will still sustain us going forward. The key now is to really make sure that the transition does not stop. This is about defending where we defend, but also having a proactive vision for how we keep moving things forward in the right directions. We need to be able to hold both and honor them both, and part of our responsibility for a more stable climate.
Yeah, just +1 on everything Natasha said, and I'll just add as well that I'm optimistic about the continued transition, in part because of what I was just talking about with the economics. You know, as much as President Trump may try and bend the law to his will, he can't bend the laws of economics to his will. You know, there are efforts right now under the Trump administration to keep a coal plant open in Michigan, despite the fact that that's costing ratepayers millions of dollars to do that. And eventually that's going to catch up with him. People, as you saw in the last election, are very concerned about high prices. And his efforts to try and do that are only going to add to that problem.
I think let's make a bit of a transition now ourselves. We gave this prize to the Environmental Defense Fund. We'd like to hear, what are you folks doing about this? What are some of your strategies, priorities? Tell us about some of the work in which EDF is trying to play a positive role in enabling and moving forward a transition to clean energy.
I might go first and talk a little bit about one vignette from the world of clean electricity and data centers. So we know that AI is garnering a lot of attention. The technology is booming. We're seeing it everywhere. We also know that this technology requires enormous amounts of energy and water to run. And so in a sense, this is very new. It's unusual to see such a rapid uptick in demand for power, and the rapid is really one of the keywords here. We still don't know exactly how big the ultimate demand is going to be. The estimates are kind of all over the map right now because there's massive uncertainty about whether it's going to be 4% of U.S. electricity demand or 15%. That's a pretty wide range. But the fact that it's coming on so quickly is giving a challenge to the power systems that our power systems were not designed to take on board. We have very complicated, messy regulatory and infrastructural systems that run power. So how do you crack the puzzle of bringing more of that clean power online? And in some ways, this is a major headwind, because if we are pushed to do things rapidly, it's more likely that it creates room to double down on the way we've always done things. It's hard to execute a transition when something becomes very, very urgent. At the same time, we've known for a long time that we really need to bring more clean power online. We need to transition from all that fossil to clean. So that's already been a prerogative that we're working towards. And interestingly enough, because of the changing economics, because of where we've come in terms of commercialization and scale and economic development as the result of a lot of work of a lot of people over years, we're in a place where, in many cases, solar plus batteries is actually the fastest thing the data centers can bring online. So all of a sudden, you are starting to see a flipping of the script where there is a greater possibility that this isn't just a headwind, but also a tailwind, because now we've got the full force of momentum of technology companies really wanting to get that power. It's also bringing a greater spotlight to areas where we can make the grid work better. There are some really technical ways that smarter, more resilient, robust grids can help both bringing clean energy online and just delivering better services across the board. This might be one of the pressures that helps us get that done. So EDF is working with three main priorities: advance the good, build as much good stuff as we can, make sure that we get grids as smart as we can get them, and try to mitigate the pollution footprint of that which is happening now. And that means there is defense against some policies like extending the life of coal plants under the premise of an energy emergency, which is quite difficult to defend. And also there's going to be a lot of gas coming online. We're already seeing it's going to be a record year for natural gas development. So we need to make sure that that natural gas is reaching the highest level of standards and the highest level of cleanliness, because those investments will also be with us for decades.
And I'll just build on that again to say that, in my piece of EDF, where we're working on methane emissions, I think that we're very proud of the efforts that we've been doing for a little over the last decade. First, to try and understand how big of an impact methane was from oil and gas. We quickly discovered, I mentioned the story before about how hydraulic fracturing was going on and all this gas was coming to market. Nobody, we realized quickly at that time, had really done the bench science to understand how much of that methane was escaping through the supply chain. We went in and filled that gap. We worked with the University of Texas and a number of oil and gas companies to go out and actually sample at these oil and gas production sites and to figure out what that number was. We built on that then by going in and doing regulatory approaches to try and get requirements in place to reduce that pollution as much as we could. Colorado became the first state with our help in 2014 to put requirements in place. Other states have followed suit, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and others. And then the Obama administration and Biden administration built upon those at the federal level, really used those state approaches as kind of the foundation for the federal approaches. Of course, that's under threat now, and we're fighting tooth and nail to defend those. I think it's a positive story of how regulation can lead to lower emissions.
So Morgan, I think your colleagues have left you the hard stuff of how do we deal with emissions from industry, cement, steel, other really hard to reduce emission areas. Tell us a bit about what EDF is doing in those areas.
Well, I'd say data centers that's not one I wanted to be assigned. So,
that's not an easy button.
But I work in the clean fuels space. And what that means is that there are a lot of sectors of the economy where we cannot electrify for various reasons. It represents about a third of our emissions, things like planes, ships, steel production, where you can't just hook it up to the power grid. And so we need clean fuel alternatives to oil and gas. And some of those come from hydrogen and its derivatives, and some come from biofuels and its derivatives. But each of those can be made in a pretty dirty way or in a super clean way. And so our work is to ensure that we're pushing forward on clean fuels development, but making sure that it's done with really clear guardrails in mind.
So I think from the beginning, EDF's work, EDF has very much tried to work with a variety of stakeholders, including, private sector, public sector, civil society, different levels of government to promote responsible climate action. So maybe tell us a little bit about, why is EDF taking that approach? Why is it important to be working with a range of stakeholders and not just maybe working with those, leading the choir, but instead trying to maybe figure out how to enlarge the choir?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important right now in the face of the onslaught of rollbacks that we're seeing that, obviously a group like EDF is not going to have the most impact with this current federal administration. So we need to work with partners. We need to work with folks on the ground in the communities that are impacted, that are feeling the health impacts. We need to also work with the members of industry that are willing to engage in a way to try and defend the standards. We see this right now with the efforts to undo the greenhouse gas reporting program and undo the endangerment finding that is sort of the foundation on which climate action and regulatory action at EPA on climate pollution is built in the United States. There are members of industry from the American Petroleum Institute, Ford Motor Company, Honda, and other companies that have been filing comments on the docket that say, you know what, please stop helping. This is not what we want. This is not going to help our business. This pendulum swinging back and forth is not good for us. We actually want to be able to show our work and show the emissions reductions that we're realizing. And part of that is because the United States is not an island. We are the world's largest energy producer or oil and gas producer. we are also the world's largest exporter. And some of the major markets that we export to aren't doing the same sort of rollbacks and backward thinking that we are. The European Union is in the process of considering requirements on the natural gas that it imports to ensure that that gas is as clean as it can be, and that countries in the EU can meet their climate goals that they've committed to. And Asian markets aren't as far along, but they're also looking at similar requirements. And so I think that's a key driver that the oil and gas industry, at least, is looking at. The producers that want to access those markets want to be able to do that with data and with the ability to tell the story that they want to tell.
I'll add that it's tricky to do this type of stakeholder engagement, and I think it's really, really important because you end up with a much more durable policy where you have the buy-in of all of the major stakeholders, but you can end up with some weird outcomes. During the Biden administration, the coalition of green groups and labor groups that came together to propose and back the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law was a big tent. And so what you ended up seeing, because we were it was like a flush time period, you ended up with just like a lot of production tax credits and subsidies for everything. And so, that might not be the most optimal outcome policy-wise, but that was what we came up with because everybody needed their, needs met. One area that has been more challenging is on carbon pricing, where, traditional allies like green groups and community organizations have hit some tension points in carbon pricing because if you put a carbon price in place, it pushes pollution to the cheapest area, which is often where disadvantaged communities live. And so, rightly so, community organizations several years ago said carbon pricing alone isn't sufficient as a solution. We need to couple that with place-based regulation so that we make sure that local facilities are not polluting and disrupting our air and water and everything. So that's been an example of where the different perspectives of different stakeholder groups together is really crucial to actually creating, lasting, impactful policy.
Yeah, I'm interested in maybe if any of you have thoughts about, you referenced carbon pricing. There had been, going back to, say, the Reagan era, a sense of pricing pollution was the way a less regulatory, more market-oriented approach would be to how do you deal with an issue like environmental pollution, whether it's carbon emissions or something else. And now we're in an environment where the conversation is one, it used to be that was the favored Republican response, conservative response. And now we're in an environment where, carbon pricing those are taxes, those are evil. Do any of you have a kind of a sense of how that transition, that shift happened? And is this a conversation that we can ever kind of move back to and get a little bit more sort of a common sense approach to thinking about tools, such market-based tools?
I think the answer is that we have to. And it's interesting you bring up, how this really started as a Republican idea. It was a Republican idea with a lot of Environmental Defense Fund involvement. We were in there advocating in the George H.W. Bush administration to get a cap and trade system in place to address acid rain. And it worked. We don't have the problems today that we did back then. It's unfortunate that that shift has happened, but it certainly happened. It used to be that Environmental Defense Fund would get criticized from our partners on the left for being in favor of market-based solutions. And now it's sort of like even that is antithetical to the political discourse. So I think we have to figure out a way. I mean, I don't know, they're probably, you guys could maybe talk to it better than me, but I don't see a way to address this issue effectively unless we figure out how to price carbon.
So there's already been reference to, dramatic changes that we've seen in federal policy in the United States we're now, the federal government is intentionally trying to promote expanded use of fossil energy, putting obstacles into renewable energy, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. Maybe let's talk a little bit about sort of, what are the implications of those changes, and then maybe also what does that mean for EDF's work? How are you pivoting at this point, or are you pondering sort of, what do we do next? How do we get out of this? Or do you already have some ideas of how to be effective in the current environment?
Yeah, I mean, we're experiencing a shift in political temperature unlike anything I think anyone here has lived through. This is a very dramatic change and a very dramatic departure from a topic area that maybe there was always political pushing pull, but there was always a bipartisan conversation to be had around it. So yes, absolutely, it changes how we do our work on a day-to-day basis. We have to, meet the moment, whatever that moment is, and figure out what the best next steps are. And so where perhaps before we were talking about tightening specific regulations, now we may be defending the very basis for them. And we've turned around and we're doing that in court. Maybe previously we were forming partnerships around specific idea A, and maybe now it's idea B, and maybe we've moved more to the state levels, and maybe we're moving more to international levels. Across the board, we've always known that states are major leaders in a lot of these topic areas, and we know that climate change is a global challenge. So all of these areas are spaces where we've been and where we've continued to work. But even as we are pivoting from some topic areas and we have to shift our strategy because we're facing a very different toolkit than we had previously, I would also say it's still up to us to carry the flame. And I don't mean just EDF, but those of us in this room to carry the flame for a vision for how we're going to achieve this challenge. Because it can't only be achieved through, small incremental changes across the board. We also have to win hearts and minds. We have to think differently, and we have to come up with a strategy that gets us where we want to go and be able to advocate for that strategy and create the basis for that strategy going forward. So we need to hold both of those things in our hearts at the same time.
I mean, and to build on that, I think that, one of the approaches that we need to take is to continue to collect data, even if the Environmental Protection Agency moves away from the greenhouse gas reporting program and no longer requires people to show their work. Groups like EDF and other groups will step in to fill that gap and make that publicly available. That was a big push behind our effort to launch the MethaneSAT satellite, was that we wanted there to be a publicly available source of information to everyone where you could see what was going on in your backyard and on the other side of the world. Unfortunately, that satellite is no longer operational, but that doesn't mean that the effort to collect data will stop. Whether that's another satellite, the satellites that have been launched in recent months that can fill some of that gap, efforts to use aircraft-based forms of data collection or what, that effort will continue. And I think that's going to be an important way to continue to force action.
All right. Morgan, maybe share some thoughts about, are there areas in which you think EDF can be working productively, bipartisan, with Democrats, with Republicans? Where are some areas that you see some optimism of having some success in finding some common solutions that people with very diverse political perspectives come together on?
I'd say perhaps ironically in the trade space. I was at a dinner with former U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Tai, and she is excited about, not excited about the tariffs, but she says that the fact that we are imposing these absurd tariffs on other countries means there's an opportunity to roll them back and to set conditions on that in the future, that you could put climate stipulations in place in order to like undo this situation that we have put ourselves in. The other piece that is relevant in the trade space is that there's often an economic competitiveness argument. So you'll see companies actually in support of a policy called a border carbon adjustment mechanism, which is where you would price traded goods based on the carbon intensity. I mentioned this before, the EU already has this policy, and for a while, I mean, there are still bills in Congress being discussed, bipartisan bills from Senator Cassidy and from Senator Whitehouse about putting forth a measure by the U.S. and because U.S. goods are already tend to be cleaner than some of our trading partners, it offers us a competitive advantage on international markets to tax our foreign trading partners' goods. So that's, I think, a space where you could start to get some creative alignment in the future. Now, that being said, I think what's happening on the Hill is different than what's happening in the administration. It's almost like we have three parties right now. So my examples would be more productive dialogues in Congress.
All right, so with the U.S. having stated we're going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, what are we seeing from the rest of the world? Are we seeing other nations, what are they staying true? Are they, moving forward? Are they pausing? Or any stepping back? Tell us a little bit about some of the different reactions other countries are having.
I mean, I have the benefit of working across North America, so I don't have a view necessarily on the whole world, but I can talk about Canada and Mexico. I think there has been some retrenchment. I won't lie. I think there has been some thinking about this. The projections that Natasha showed don't show that folks are meeting their commitments, and more action is needed. However, in the face of that, we are seeing continued leadership from at least the folks in our neighborhood. So Prime Minister Carney in Canada continues to talk about the importance of acting on climate change. In the coming weeks, he's expected to release a climate competitiveness strategy that is about how acting on climate is going to help the competitiveness of Canadian products. And I think that methane can be a key cornerstone of that strategy. Like I was saying before, as these foreign markets are requiring cleaner energy, and the United States is retreating, Canada can help fill that void. And I think they see that opportunity and want to grasp it. Similarly, in Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum is herself a climate scientist. She is now president of Mexico and has made climate action and specifically action on methane from Pemex, which is the state-owned oil company in Mexico, a key part of her policy framework for what she wants to see happen.
So Morgan, in parts of the world where, the particularly global south, where there are really important issues of human health, human development needs, climate can compete with those kinds of things. Maybe tell us a little bit about how those competing needs, priorities, how does that play out in the way some parts of the world are responding to the climate COPs, the Conference of the Parties under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Paris Agreement?
Mm-hmm. It's a really good question, and it's kind of a difficult one to answer. So COP is coming up, the Conference of the Parties is coming up in 2 weeks, and it's unclear, I don't think the vibes are gonna be good. They've got a lot to tackle. deforestation is sort of like issue number one. It's being held in Brazil, so that's obviously a very relevant issue there. But an example of exactly that tension point is that, Brazil understands that we need to preserve forests, but also they see an economic opportunity to create biofuels and sell them into the market. And they've just issued a major pledge to increase the amount of biofuels production. Health, food systems, all of those are like major agenda items under discussion, and there are constantly trade-offs as well. Another example in the biofuel space is that the more that you increase production of biofuels, the less land is available for food production, and there's direct trade-offs on food prices. And so it is just a really difficult optimization problem at hand. And making that even more complicated is a lack of political will in some major economies, like this one. Okay. Did somebody say something hopeful? We can't end on that.
I mean, I just to quickly circle back on the bipartisan question, because it just popped into my head. Something hopeful.
Okay, good.
Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania, right, from New Hope, was brave enough to stand up to some of the Trump administration rollbacks. So I wish that there were more Republicans that showed that level of leadership and courage. I think there are others, and I think that others will join him both in the House and the Senate.
Okay. So, in a moment, we're going to be taking questions from the audience. We'll give priority to questions from students first. So start thinking about questions that you want to ask. And as you do that, I'll pose one last question to our panel here. And so thinking about our audience, which is primarily undergraduates, are there still careers in environmental fields? How does one prepare for those? How does one pursue those? And keeping it hopeful if you can, which I think you can.
I mean, I do want to acknowledge that, many of the fellowships that helped me enter my career have been closed or curtailed or stopped, and that's a very depressing thought. Hopeful. We're getting there. It's the upswing, Morgan. It's the upswing. So, again, we can recognize that there are some challenges that we are facing right now, and they are very real. But I will also point out that there was a time when we said that there was this little sector over here of climate jobs, and then there were all other jobs. We're moving into a world now where all jobs are climate jobs, because all of us are going to be living in a climate-changed world. And this is not going to be linear, and this is not going to be determined by only what's happening today. This is a longer-term story, and really what the world is going to need is people who can solve problems. And what I saw today here at Dickinson is a lot of students who know how to move across different disciplines, who know how to ask probing questions that take courage and difficulty, that know how to look tough things straight in the face and ask the hard question that moves it to the next level. That's exactly what we need out there, and we need all of it. No matter where any of you end up in the student body, we would love you to be part of this movement. And yes, there will be space, there will be room, there will be opportunity. Sometimes it might not look exactly like the packaged opportunities that maybe were available a year ago, but who knows? It may well be in 5 years from now, we're going to find ourselves with a very robust and growing community that needs to build out our response. Because as much as I wish we could just imagine that climate change will just fade if we stop talking about it, we know it's going to accelerate if we stop talking about it. So there will be so much need, and there will be so much value and so much meaning that you can bring to this topic.
I'll just add one call to action, and you don't even need to wait till you graduate. For those of you that are 18 years old, register to vote. You live in Pennsylvania, guys. This is incredibly important.
Okay, so now we're ready for some questions from the audience. So I think we've got Jillian over on this side with a microphone, and who's our other, Kara. So maybe if you do different aisles of the audience here, who would like to ask the first question? The very top, an enthusiastic question. Jillian, do you see up there? Is that Pia?
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. Hi, my name is Pia, as Neil just mentioned. I'm just curious because yesterday I was looking at a video of like Elon Musk, and you just mentioned like Pennsylvania being an important state as a battleground state. I was watching a video of like Elon Musk giving constituents in Pennsylvania, like I think it was like awards of $1 million. So I was just curious about the role of that kind of like clientelism and like pork belly politics, and I don't know, also like when you guys work with politicians, like how you guys lobby, maybe not in like such a corrupt way, but yeah, I'm just curious, like from both ends, like positive lobbying but also like problematic lobbying, if you could give some more insight just given your positions and work with the Environmental Defense Fund. Thank you.
That's a great question. Yeah, we're not planning to start a lottery like Elon did. I'd be curious if anybody ever saw that money. You know, did anybody ever hear? Did anybody ever really get that? I don't know the answer. But, you know, one of the ways EDF has long operated is to try and meet people where they are. So for those of us in this room that understand the problem of climate change and want to fix it, you know, we can talk about this issue in terms of greenhouse gas reductions and tons of you know, abatement possibilities and that sort of thing. But we have to recognize that there are people, you know, probably in this community, certainly in Pennsylvania, and definitely in this country, that don't agree with us and don't necessarily see this as a problem that needs to be addressed, or they may not even believe it's a problem at all. For those folks, they may understand, though, that they don't like to see all the negative air pollution from the practices that are going on from the power plants, from the oil and gas development, and what it's doing in terms of asthma that their kids are getting. They may not like the fact that the oil and gas industry is wasting a bunch of energy that could be realized and that could be captured and more tax and royalty revenue realized from that to make better roads and better health care in places like Pennsylvania. So by trying to lobby and talk to people where they are and show them that even if, you know, maybe we don't agree on it this way, we definitely agree on it that way, I think we can affect change.
I might just add a little anecdote. When I came out of the sciences and I had my first experience lobbying, I found myself feeling, oh, ick. Isn't this all of that awful sort of pork belly manipulative underscore politics that I don't believe in? And there's absolutely that part of the story. I won't deny that there are very real issues with how our democracy works, the influence of money in our democracy. There's a whole story to be told about that. But I will note that very often people making policy decisions in Congress have to move fast and often have limited information. So they will put in that phone call to an organization that they trust, that they think that can give them straight answers and help them understand what is the best way to design this tax credit, what is the best way to actually mitigate methane emissions. If we do A, you know, the companies say that they'll do B. Is that right or is that wrong? And in many cases, the hope is that organizations with integrity and that work with transparency and that are science-led, like EDF, but not only EDF, like hopefully many people in the room will be in this world too, can be that phone call to help communicate what the stakes are and what the needs are and help design better policy at the end of the day. So I just will flag that it's very often happening in quiet rooms. It's not happening in front of the camera cameras, but there is a lot of very good work that goes on behind the scenes to try to make sure we get to good answers on policy.
I would like to invite John to discuss Citizens United, if he would like to.
Yeah, a little pressure there. This came up in a class this morning. The question was, if you could do one thing, what would that one thing be to make things better? And I think we all had really good answers, but different ones. Mine was campaign finance reform, beginning with repealing Citizens United. So for those of you who don't know what that decision was, Supreme Court decision that said that corporations are people and that their speech is money and therefore is protected by the First Amendment. And that has led to a huge flood of corporate money into politics that I think has skewed the ability of folks like us to outweigh the voice of industry. And if you look at polling, consistently, the majority, if not the vast majority of Americans want to see action on climate, but we don't get it. And I think that part of that is because of the campaign finance system.
Who wants to ask our next question? Eva. And those who had your hands up over here, put them up again so I can kind of see you for the next round. Okay, so Jillian, have you got eyes on those folks? All right.
Hi, my name is Eva Hanlon. Thank you so much for being here today, for spending your time and sharing your knowledge with us here at Dickinson. I wanted to ask, we were talking about taxing imports based on carbon intensity, and we're also talking about the amount of infrastructure and goods that we'll need to create that infrastructure. And also having a limited amount of time to do everything. So I was wondering, how do you see these policies like taxing based on carbon intensity, working at the same time as us developing that infrastructure that's needed for this clean energy transition?
That's a really good, hard question. I think that the technical answer is there should likely be a phased approach for when those policies get rolled out to buy enough time to get projects in the ground in the meantime. But setting those demand signals as soon as possible is really critical because of the lead time that you just discussed. I'm sort of been thinking more recently, so this is not an EDF endorsed position at all. I haven't discussed it with anyone. But I think because of the transition that it will take to get some of these cleaner solutions off the ground, we do need to be thinking in somewhat pragmatic way of for new ships, for example. Let's make sure that we're building them with the new engines that can take a future fuel that is not economical today, but is there also a solution that we can just drop into existing engines for ships or trucks or whatever else? And that's not a disciplined approach that we love to take because we just want to do the best climate thing right away. But we also need to be realistic about what our infrastructure assets look like right now, and make sure that we're building in a way that makes sense but isn't locking in stuff that we don't need in the future.
Build as good a hub as you can now while planning for something better in the future. That's a Dickinson issue there. Next.
So you mentioned that electrification, sorry, I'm not used to talking through a mic, is a large portion of the solution in the energy transition. When hearing about solar and EVs, I often hear the issue of mining come up for batteries, for what else? And there's a lot of concerns there about environmental justice and what if we run out of the metals needed to use. So do you see concerns here? Are there ways to ameliorate the problems?
Yes, this is a huge issue, and one that requires a lot more engagement and a lot more work. Yes, critical minerals are absolutely the backbone of a renewable energy transition, and critical minerals are in some cases being produced in places in the world with serious humanitarian abuses and terrible environmental impacts. Those are two very complicated facts to hold in our hearts at the same time. But this is where, unlocking a toolkit of science and regulatory policy and international policy and trade policy and getting the full toolkit of the different strategies to bear and trying to find a solution is really the way you go at a problem like this. There are options like greater recycling of the critical minerals that we have now. There's work ongoing to try to use less cobalt and to need less critical minerals that are harder to find and harder to get. I know others are doing work that relates to certifying specific supply chains of critical minerals. So there are many different angles that one can go at for this work, but we need a lot more brilliant minds to dedicate to it.
All right, so you mentioned conflict earlier in this question segment, and I'm just wondering, how do you open the discussion and confront the tensions surrounding climate change with people of different backgrounds or beliefs than you?
With Thanksgiving coming up, I'm sure that's a front of mind issue for a lot of folks in this room. I wish I had a perfect answer for everyone. I think it really depends on the person that you're talking to. Kind of like I was saying before, if you know that person, cares about public health. Maybe they have asthma, or they have a kid with asthma. You can talk about it from that perspective. If they're a fiscal conservative and they don't like to see waste of taxpayer dollars, there's that issue you could talk about. There's, the fact that there's this huge hurricane that's like super scary, that's hitting the Caribbean right now. So yeah, it's kind of finding what resonates with that particular person, I think, is the key.
I might just add to that, it's kind of breathtaking when you look at the last 5-10 years, what's happened in the space of social media and how we consume news and how we argue about news. Increasingly, I'm sure there's great study that's been performed on this, but increasingly you see extreme arguments taken from the far ends of the spectrum, and then that becomes the scarecrow that gets knocked down by the other side. I will say that as much as there is terrible intolerance in the world, and there are some very toxic conversations happening everywhere, the spaces that we live in involve a lot of people who are trying to practice the craft of governance, and there's still a lot of very constructive conversation to be had, and a lot of people who come to the table trying to find what that lowest common denominator is where you can still move forward. So I just want to, make a hopeful comment that still exists. That's still out there, that's still possible. And I think it means stepping away from some of those more extreme pieces and, as John said, finding what animates people. Everybody has values. We share a lot of those values. We want to live in a space with a good environment and good jobs and a good economy. We want better lives for our children. These things are universal. And in some ways, the communications have been weaponized against our own society to try to make those conversations harder to happen. So we have to lean the other way.
I also think it's important to think about, to try to understand somebody else's motivation for their perspective. A lot of it, I think, is fear. Like, if you acknowledge climate change is real, like that first visual is terrifying. And so it's helpful to just try to understand why somebody's being so resistant to it, and then if possible maybe pair it with some hopeful things, some examples of where we're making progress, so that the problem doesn't seem totally insurmountable, because it's not.
I might just add a personal note that socially, within communities of people at EDF, we've often found ourselves around a table realizing that we all come from families with very different political perspectives in the family, or a community where the community had a very different political perspective. Many of us have sort of naturally come out of these spaces where we needed to make that bridging happen. So I suspect many of you also have that experience. You may find that it serves you very well going into the future and trying to have an impact.
And just to build on that with a personal example from my family, thinking about the question that you just posed reminded me of my brother-in-law and conversations I've had with him. He's a climate skeptic, I think he would say, but he's also a pilot. And he one time said to me, "How can this be a problem? Carbon dioxide makes up less than 2% of the atmosphere. How can it be driving all this problem?" And I said, "Scott, you're a pilot. If I told you that I was going to switch out 2% of the gasoline in the tank of your airplane with water, would that be okay? Small things can make a big difference." And that sort of set him back a little bit.
Yeah. And if you continue the conversation, you might mention that heat-seeking missiles, an issue for pilots, very much is based on the physics of the thermal properties of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide. So that might have time maybe for one more question. Jillian, up behind you there, yellow sweater.
Hi, I was wondering, how does EDF being a nonprofit influence the organization's goal-setting process?
I think in a positive sense, it allows us to, keep a clear eye on, what are the most impactful measures we can put in place. There are some conservation groups that take money from corporate donors. EDF in the United States doesn't do that. And so that, I think, kind of allows us to be an honest partner with the companies that we work with, but it doesn't make us beholden to them. We continue to keep our eye on trying to push the environmental progress that we think needs to be made.
So I'll pose the last question, which is, are you hopeful? And hopefully you are. Maybe tell us what gives you hope.
I take enormous hope from thinking about the arc of history and the fact that we're on it, and the fact that good work and good people working together are always what have brought about meaningful change. And we have that already in this room. We have that in our partnerships. We see it every day. You may feel like we are losing at different points in time. The same was true of the civil rights movement. The same was true in different stages of war across history. Sometimes it does not feel like winning, but it's always been the same formula of good people working together to do good together that's gotten us to the other side. And we absolutely have that today and tomorrow.
I'll sort of key off of something Natasha said earlier. And what gives me hope is all of you in this room. You guys have a lot of other things you could have done on a Wednesday night in Carlisle, I'm sure. But you decided to come here and listen to us. And that indicates to me that you care about these issues and you want to affect change. So as much as I know this award is meant to help us, share knowledge with you and share the benefits of our experience with you, I feel like over the last several days, I've gotten as much from you all in terms of optimism and hope as I think I've been able to give.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with both of those sentiments. I think the more that we get pushback, the more that it means that we're making progress. And we're really riling people up who are seeing, you know, that there's a real movement happening here, and I think that's only going to continue over the long term.
And with that, join me in thanking our panelists. And that concludes our program. Thank you.